Thank you. So I have a guy in my small group. I don't know if you're in small group. You should be. I have a guy in my small group who insists on always taking his shoes off and exposing us to his man toes during group. It's very weird. When we went to his house and he did that, I thought, well, he's just real comfortable in his house. But then the next week we're at a different person's house and he wore flip-flops and had no trouble taking his shoes off and just exposing himself to all of us. It's really gross. The only thing worse than that recently is the church that we attend at home when I'm in town. We have decided to change seats. I bet most of you kind of sit in your own, like you sit almost in the same place every time you come, right? Do you do that? It's not your seat, but you might as well be. And so we were that way. We were sitting in this one area, and then 2 or 3 weeks in a row, somebody sat right near us who also decided to take their shoes off during the service and rub their fingers between their toes. So you talk about not being able to pay attention to the service, right? So we're talking about what bothers us. Man toes are a problem for me. I don't know about you. Maybe it's just my hang up. I don't think we should be exposing people to man toes. I don't know why God created them that way. They're disgusting. If you think your feet are good looking and you're a guy, you're wrong. They're not that attractive, okay? They might have been when you were like 1.5. I have a 3-month-old granddaughter. She has the cutest feet ever, you know? I have a 16-year-old daughter. It's not the same anymore, okay? So I don't know what bothers you. I don't know what causes you to respond or react to things, you know? For me, man toes, okay? There's a bunch more, but we don't have a lot of time. So I don't know what that is for you, but having things that bother you, having things that are pet peeves or, you know, whatever that get on your nerves, that's not like a new thing, right? We've been doing that since people have been around. There's been things that have bothered us. It's kind of fun in a way. If you read the Bible, like you find all sorts of things that bother people. Jesus is an interesting example. He didn't really have like a lot of pet peeves. I mean, he's Jesus, okay? So he didn't have like a lot. He had a couple. There was one moment where he flips tables over at the temple. So, you know, if you're selling pigeons for a profit at the temple, he doesn't like that. He was also kind of annoyed by really religious people who are hypocritical. That was a pet peeve. That's not you. You're better than that, but you maybe know some of these people who are real religious, but they're real hypocritical. Jesus is annoyed by them, okay? That's the annoyance. But the followers of Jesus had lots of things that perturbed them, bothered them, got on their nerves, like a whole laundry list. I mean, Rome got on their nerves, right, in the first century because they were like so oppressed by Rome. Tax collectors, you know, taxation gets on our nerves. The IRS probably is one of your pet peeves. You should have grown up in the first century. I mean, it was way worse. Tax collectors got on their nerves. But there was this one kind of group of people called the Samaritans who the Jewish people really didn't like. And Jesus had these 12 followers. They're the disciples. They were Jewish, men. They hated the Samaritans. Okay, these guys did not like the Samaritans at all for lots of good reasons or bad reasons. The Samaritans were not Jewish, but they were like Jewish in a way. They had kind of integrated in with some Jewish people, but this is their words, not mine. They kind of saw them as half-breeds. They were like mixed race, everything that we would see now and go, ugh. That's why they didn't like the Samaritans. So the Samaritans didn't agree that Jerusalem was where the capital was and that's where the temple should be. They had a different temple in a different place. So they acted like Jewish people, but from a different way, different perspective. They hated them. Jesus so many times would tell stories like about, you should love your neighbor. They go, who is your neighbor? And Jesus would go, Samaritans. And they go, So he was always kind of using these people kind of to help prove a point. So that's the setup. There's this moment where Jesus is walking to Jerusalem with his people. Now remember, back then, you didn't go anywhere very fast. Nobody had Teslas, okay? So when you went from one place to another, it took a minute. And you would often have to stay overnight or in a village or whatever as you did it. So Jesus and his disciples are traveling to Jerusalem, but they got to go through an area, and that's kind of where we pick the story up. Okay, Luke tells us about it. Here's what Luke writes. As the time approached for him Jesus to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. So quick setup. This is getting kind of close to and I don't want to spoil this for you, but Jesus is going to be crucified. 3 days later, he's going to come back to life. Pretty crazy, okay? So if you've ever been to an Easter service, that's where we're headed, okay? First Easter. So he knows it's coming. He's been telling his disciples for a while, this is going to happen. But they're slow or whatever. They can't comprehend it. Like they can't figure out that this is actually going to happen. In fact, it doesn't even make sense it's going to happen. How are they going to kill Jesus? Jesus is the miracle worker. How are they going to even pull this thing off? I mean, Jesus is turning water into wine. He's getting invited to every party. He's curing blindness. He's touching lepers and not getting leprosy. He's curing leprosy. So certainly he can get out of this thing if they're really going to try to do it. So they don't even really believe him. But Jesus, he is resolute because he knows that when he gets to Jerusalem, it's going to go down, that they're going to falsely arrest him. They're going to beat him. He knows that he'll be crucified in Jerusalem. So he's resolute and he's heading towards Jerusalem. So story continues, okay? Story continues. And he sent messengers, so probably a couple of his disciples. He sent a few of his disciples on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people in that village, they did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. They're Jewish people, Samaritan village. They want to stop. They maybe want to have a meal, hang out for, overnight, whatever it is. And they're like, nope, you're not allowed here. We know you're Jewish. We know you're going to Jerusalem. You think that's the center of the world, and it's not. So big disagreement happens. So the disciples, they have this moment. You should all read your Bibles. Like, it's so funny in a way. They have this moment where they turn to Jesus and say the most ridiculous thing, right? So they turn to Jesus. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked Jesus, Lord, do you want us to call fire down to destroy them? That's in the Bible. Okay, James and John, okay, the brothers, they're disciples. They're some of Jesus' favorite people, by the way. James and John, they're like, yeah, we don't really like those Samaritans. Can we just nuke them? Is that cool, Jesus? If we just burn them up to a crisp, Can you imagine being Jesus, right? He's like, you guys are such morons, right? No, we're not going to rain fire down on the village of Samaritans. We're not going to do that. Have you listened to anything that I have said, right? So Jesus turns to them, and he's very kind. Jesus kind of turns to them, and he says, and he rebukes them, right? He's like, guys, come on, right? And then he and his disciples went to just a different village. I mean, this is so crazy. Jesus is like, okay, first of all, no, we're not raining fire on people. Second, we'll just go to the other place. We'll just go to the other village. It's okay. Stop freaking out, right? Have you ever heard the phrase, that was an overreaction? You ever heard that? That's an overreaction, right? I don't really think I like these people. Can we burn them up? That's an overreaction, I don't really think that they believe the way that they should believe. They don't vote the way that they should vote. Can we just burn them to the ground? I mean, overreaction. I have a 16-year-old daughter at home. I get to use the phrase, that was an overreaction, a lot. If you have kids, you've probably lived through that, especially during those teenage years, And here's the reality is that it's easy to overreact. Overreacting is an easy thing to do. And we would think the older we get, right, the more mature someone gets, the less they would overreact. But we all know as adults, that isn't necessarily true. We just overreact about different things, right? When you were a kid and your candy fell on the floor, you're weeping and gnashing of teeth, Now we're an adult, we do the same thing. It's just not candy. It's over something else. But we have this tendency to react and often overreact. In this series, that's what we've been talking about, that when something happens, we typically have one or two different things happen. When an opportunity to respond occurs, most of us tend to overreact when that happens. Bryant set this up yesterday. Overreaction is kind of what normally happens. We bump into a moment and we don't like it. We overreact. Someone posts something on social media. They're obviously wrong. We keyboard courage up and we overreact, Someone is late to a meeting. Oh my gosh, they're the worst. We just always tend to be overreactors. And people note that. They pay attention. They take note of that when we overreact. People also take note when we underreact. We don't see a lot of underreactions, right? But whenever we do see one, isn't it amazing? And they're few and far between. But isn't it amazing? When we see an underreaction, we all pause. Because it's so weird. It's so unique. When it's so unexpected, maybe. When It's definitely counterintuitive. It's countercultural. It's very remarkable. When someone is wronged and they don't turn the wrong back and try to get revenge, it's an underreaction. It's remarkable. Like when someone, have you ever seen this before? Maybe you were watching like a TikTok or a YouTube, and it was like a good one. There was a person in a courtroom maybe, and maybe somebody had done something really horrible. But instead of screaming at them, they forgave them. Have you ever seen something like that? And we're so drawn to those stories. Why? Because it's an underreaction. It's so remarkable. It's just so not normal. And it causes us all to kind of pause. It causes us to kind of pay attention, to wonder, like, why are they doing that? What's interesting is that the more intense a moment, or the bigger the wrong, or the harder it would be to forgive, the more intensity with it, the more we are drawn to the underreaction. At the same time, the more we are typically prone to be an overreactor, right? Like, think back for a minute to the things that perturb you, something bigger than man toes, okay? So, like, what's something that really bothers you? What's something that gets on your nerves? It could be a group of people. If they're beside you, no elbowing, please, okay? So, think of something that kind of bothers you for a minute. Now, what is it about that thing that causes you to overreact? Like, what is it about it that causes you to not underreact, but to kind of quickly overreact? There's a few things. I thought about this for a while. I can list a few. One is really like an emotional trigger for us. Sometimes we've experienced something in our past, and maybe it was a choice that you made that led to a series of events. Most of the time, it's not even a choice you made. Somebody else made the choice. Somebody else did something, and you just caught the shrapnel from it. But you had an experience. Something happened. And, now if you see something or hear something that feels any way similar to it, you just react. You often overreact because you want to kind of take back control of that moment. You don't want to have that emotion. You don't want to remember that thing, right? Or maybe it's like a stress or an anxiety or a worry thing for you. When we're stressed, we tend to really overreact quickly, don't we? It's kind of like our cup is so full that a drop more and it's overflowing. We just can't take it. We're so stressed. We're so anxious. In moments like that, we're trying to kind of take back control. We overreact to try to control that stress and control that anxiety because we don't really have the patience to deal with it. Or maybe it's an insecurity thing. We all are insecure in some way, and maybe for you overreact because you're trying to control your image or control how people see you or what people think about you. And if somebody says something about you that you don't like, or they say something about you that, I hate to say it, but maybe it's true, but you wish it weren't true and you want to pretend it's not true. And so you try to control that moment and control your image. You control the way you're seen, and we overreact to do that. Or maybe just, one more. Maybe it's just like an unmet expectation thing. Like you expect something from somebody, and this is good marriage advice. Your spouse never heard that you wanted that. They never agreed to this expectation. You've never voiced it, but you expect it. And so when they don't meet the expectation, now you're mad, and you're overreacting, although they never even knew about this. This happens at work a lot where, a boss has somebody who works for them and they have an expectation, but it was never voiced, it was never clear. And then the boss overreacts when the expectation isn't met, but they didn't know. And they're trying to control the situation because when the expectation isn't met, we tend to react. When you think about, there's so many more things, but when you think about all of those things, there is one item that is kind of the undercurrent of all of it. There's just one thing that sits under all of it, and maybe you caught it. It's this word control. Because we all of us, me included, we all have this desire to control things. We have this desire to control everything, other people, situations, elections, you name it. We want to control our neighborhood. That's why you got involved in the HOA and realized that was a mess, we want to control everything. And most overreactions, this is important, most overreactions happen when they happen when we feel like we're losing control of a situation. Most overreactions happen when we feel like we don't have control anymore, that we're losing control of a situation. Listen, this is one of the things that makes Jesus so interesting to study. It's one of the things that makes Jesus so kind of unique and so different, because he wasn't an overreactor. If we go back for a minute to that story, right? They're traveling from to Jerusalem. They are going to go through the Samaritan city. The disciples want to rain fire down upon it. He's like, "Hey, chill out," right? So as the story goes, and you may know this story, as the story goes, they're traveling. They get to Jerusalem. They have this Passover feast. It's the night before Jesus is going to be crucified. Now, I don't know if you knew that your crucifixion was the next day, you probably wouldn't behave the way Jesus did. But he shared a meal with these guys. He washed their feet to prove a point about serving. I mean, it's just incredible the things he did. Late in that evening, he leaves and he takes a few guys, Peter, James, and John. And they go to this place called the Garden of Gethsemane. And he's praying in the garden. He asks these guys to come along and keep him company because he's really distraught about what's about to happen. Because while he's fully God, he's also fully man, and it's going to really hurt. It's going to be painful, miserable. In fact, the executions on a cross are typically the worst kinds of deaths you could possibly experience. And he knows that's coming. So he goes to the garden, he's praying. A couple of times during the night, he kind of wanders back over to Peter and Andrew and James and John, and they're asleep. But he doesn't overreact. He just nudges them and he was like, "Hey guys, you kind of stink, but would you mind staying with me?" And Jesus is praying all night, and he prays this beautiful prayer. He prays, "God, if there's any other way for this to happen, I'd prefer it, but not my will, your will be done. Whatever you want is what I'm here to do." So the next day, early in the morning, like probably 4-ish a.m. or something like that, the religious leaders, who Jesus had a problem with, right, for good reason, they send an army to arrest him. Now, why did they send an army? Because when you're about to be arrested, people typically what? Overreact, right? They really react strongly to this. So they show up with an army of people to arrest Jesus. Judas betrays Jesus. Jesus is standing there. Peter is with him. I don't know if you know this. Peter grabs a sword and slices the ear off of one of the people. Okay, that was an overreaction. So he slices the ear off. Jesus miraculously picks up the ear, slaps it back on, and heals the guy. Okay, and they still arrest him. I don't know about you. If you're ever in an arresting army and somebody heals an ear that was sliced off, rethink what you're doing. Follow the guy. Don't arrest him, okay? But they didn't because it had to be done. So they arrest Jesus. He doesn't respond or resist. He doesn't overreact. In fact, he doesn't even react. He underreacts. It's such a ridiculous underreaction, it makes no sense. So they take him before the religious leaders and then eventually before Pilate. And you can read about this in all the Gospels. Let me read what happens from Matthew. This is what Matthew wrote. Matthew says that meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor. It was a guy named Pilate. So he's already been arrested. He's been falsely accused by some Jewish people and these false witnesses, although he doesn't really do anything and doesn't react at all. And so the governor asks him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" That's what people are claiming. "You have said so," Jesus replied. This is about the only thing that Jesus says the whole time. And he doesn't even say, "Well, let me explain it," and none of that. He just says, "Yeah, it's what you said." Okay, the story continues, right? So when he was accused by the chief priest and the elders, he gave no answer at all. Imagine for a minute that you're Jesus and you know what's coming. And people are bringing false witnesses against you. They're claiming things that aren't even true, not even close. And you don't say anything. You just let it happen. You underreact in a huge way. It doesn't even make sense kind of way. It didn't make sense to Pilate, the governor. So then Pilate kind of goes and he asks him, "Do you not hear this testimony they're bringing against you? Jesus, are you listening to what's happening? Okay, this is heading in one direction and it ain't good for you. Are you listening? Don't you want to say something?" But Jesus, he made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Of course, to the great amazement of the governor. Now, think about this story. There's a question we have to figure out. And the question is this: Why did Jesus underreact? Why did he underreact? The Bible answer is simple, because he's God and he has to die, and yeah, that's true. But I think there might be more to it than just that. I think there might be a lesson to be learned about the way Jesus handles moments like this that's bigger than just because he had to do it. Because when you read through his whole life, when you read through the Gospels of Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, he's constantly underreacting. He's constantly doing this. It's like the way of Jesus in a way. So why is he such an underreactor? Why does he do this? Well, what's the lesson? If you're a Jesus follower, if you're not a Christian and you're here because, again, like somebody invited you, you're getting free lunch out of this, like I'm so glad you're here, okay? But if you're a Christian, if you're a Jesus follower, if that's what we claim to be, for those of you who are like me, what are we supposed to learn from this? Like, why did Jesus underreact so much? And in the Gospel of John, John's one of the disciples who was there, like in the Garden of Gethsemane. I mean, saw all of this stuff. When he wrote about this moment, he included like a little bit something else that I think gives us a hint. Here's how John wrote it. John says, do you refuse to speak to me? This is Pilate talking to Jesus in the same moment. Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? I mean, again, Pilate, he has the power. Like the religious leaders may have claimed he should be crucified, Pilate's the one who gets to say yes or no. He's like the governor, you know? You have to be executed. No, I'm gonna let you out. Don't you realize, Jesus, that I have the power to do that? And Jesus looks at him and Jesus answered, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. I mean, think about that. Jesus is looking at the very person who thinks he has the power. And Jesus says, nah, the only reason you have the power is because someone more powerful than you has allowed you to have the power. It's almost like Jesus basically said, I don't need to attempt to take control. I don't need to attempt to take control, and I'll tell you why. Because there is someone else with real power that is in control. And you know what? I'm gonna trust him. Like, I don't need to attempt to take control. I need to overreact and take control. And I'll tell you why, because I think somebody else has way bigger power than you, Pilate, and they're in control. And I'm gonna just put my trust in that person. Peter, who was there, you know, overreact, slice the ear off Peter. He's always overreacting, right? He got out of the boat and walked on water. That's an overreaction. I mean, he's always doing it. When Peter thought back on this moment, when he reflected back in his letter that he wrote, here's what Peter said. It's beautiful. Peter says, when they hurled their insults at him, at Jesus, he didn't retaliate. He underreacted. When he suffered, he made no threats. He underreacted. He wasn't living to get vengeance. He wasn't trying to get revenge. He wasn't driven by any of that. Instead, he entrusted himself to who judges justly. When Peter thought back and remembered how all of this happened and remembered the way Jesus lived and how he reacted in moments where everybody else would overreact, it came down to that word, entrusted. Entrusted. He entrusted. Jesus entrusted something. He trusted in something bigger than him and bigger than the moment and bigger than the reaction, bigger than the circumstance. So here's the deal, right? We overreact, right, to take control. We always do. We overreact to take control. However, we underreact when we believe, when we entrust that God is in control. That's the difference. I don't know if you've thought of it or not, but that is the difference between overreacting and underreacting. When we overreact, we do it because we think we have to take control. We overreact because we think we're the person who needs to get things back in order. But control is a myth, right? Like none of us are really truly powerful enough to control. We can't even control ourselves. How are we going to control anything else? See, Jesus understood that. The disciples watched him for 3 years. They just couldn't wrap their head around why he was such an underreactor. Why was he always underreacting? And the reason is that he just trusted God. Because here's the reality, who we trust actually dictates how we react. Wherever we place our trust is going to determine how we react. If we want to place our trust in ourselves or in our world or in a political candidate or a party or a platform or, you name it, your job, your wealth, anything. If we want to place our trust in that, we're going to be overreactors. Because the minute it starts slipping away or moving in a different, or not going the way that we think it should, we're going to overreact. But when we place our trust in God, it allows us to be underreactors because we believe he's actually in control, that he has the entire world in his hands, and that he is in control. It's so interesting, again, when you read through the Gospels, these disciples, they didn't get this for 3 or so years. Jesus' ministry was about 3 or so years. They didn't get it until after the resurrection. And then when Jesus came back to life, everything changed dramatically. But it wasn't until then that they understood how to be underreactors. Because that's what helped them believe that God really was God and they really was in control and that they actually could trust him. Again, if you're a Christian, if you're a Jesus follower, just for a second, think about how challenging it really is to follow the commands and the things that we've been told to do by Jesus, by the disciples, how we're supposed to live and love and treat people. Think about how challenging that is. Part of the challenge, maybe the challenge, is because we just haven't placed our trust in the right place. If we shift our trust to God, we can do some things that we're asked and called to do. But if we keep trying to control things ourselves and trust ourselves, we're never going to be able to do the things that God's called us to do. Again, this is kind of uncomfortable if you're a Jesus follower. Can I give you several things that we're supposed to do? Think about how hard these things are to do. Like, here's one from Jesus, right? Jesus said that we're supposed to, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, which, by the way, he loved all of us equally, and we were all very unlovable at the time. And he loved us anyway. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. You can't love people who are unlovable if you don't trust that God's in control of everything. You can't. That might be the reason we struggle with it. Can I give you several more? Isn't this fun? Let me give you another one, all right? Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. See, we live in a world where if you ain't first, you're last, right? That's Talladega Nights, Ricky Bobby, okay? So, but we live in a world where being first is all that matters. Winning is all that matters. Can I, really quick, something's happening Tuesday. It's a big deal, okay? Something's happening Tuesday. Can I just share something? I think you probably are aware of this. No one cares about doing what's right. They only care about winning. Nobody cares, seemingly, it feels this way, actually about you or about the country or about anything other than winning. That's what they care about. So we'll do and say and claim or do anything we want because we want to win at all costs, because we want to control everything. That's all that is. Why? Because we're not trusting in something bigger than that, right? Okay, let me give you some more. Think about trying to do this without trusting God. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Can you imagine giving your life away for other people? We're actually called to do that. You can't do it if you're not trusting that God's actually in control. Makes no sense. Completely incapable. All right, here's another one. Matthew. You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for people who persecute you. I feel like we're really lucky in this season of our life, or maybe we're not, but it feels like we're lucky that there isn't really any persecution happening. I mean, there's persecution in the world, but not here on any real level. I mean, I know somebody called you a name one time, but somebody's chopping your head off. Like, it's not significant persecution. So we're really even just trying to figure this part out. How do you love your enemy? How do you do that? Well, you first start by trusting that God's in control. That's how. Can I give you one other thing with this? It becomes so much easier to love your enemy when you realize that if you had grown up in your enemy's shoes, experiencing their home life, their experiences, everything that happened, you would probably be exactly like them. The reason that we think the way we think is because we grew up where we grew up and lived what we lived and experienced what we experienced. But the people who grew up differently and were told differently and experienced differently, they weren't told wrongly, it was just differently. And their experiences were different. You would probably think exactly like they think if you had grown up the way they grew up. So they're not even really enemies. They just had different circumstances. They're not wrong in the same way that you're not right. It's just different. It's amazing. But we can't even begin to get there if we're not trusting God first. Otherwise, we want to control them because they're wrong, Okay, let me go another one. Ephesians. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. God forgave you without any guarantee you would even say thank you. That you would even acknowledge that you needed it. That's how we're called to forgive other people. That's really hard to do if you don't put your full trust in Jesus first. Do not repay evil for evil, Peter says, or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. This word evil is being thrown around a lot lately, especially in this season. We're in this political season. Everybody on the other side is evil, which can't be true, but everybody's evil. Well, let's assume it is true for a minute. What are we supposed to do as believers? We're supposed to repay them with blessing. How do you do that? Good luck if you're not entrusting God's actually in control, right? Philippians, Paul wrote this. Paul wrote that, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. If there is no God, you better look to your own interest, because this is get as much as you can get out of this. If God is really God and he's really in control, then we can do this. We could go on and on. We don't have time, but just think about it. Think about how challenging all that stuff is. And listen, I can tell you personally, when I think about why I have struggled in all of my Jesus following years to get some of those things right, I think part of it, or maybe all of it, is because I want to control stuff. And I overreact instead of taking a page from Jesus and trusting that God's really in control no matter what, and underreacting. I know you know this. You're here at Centerpoint, you know this, but somebody's going to win an election. It probably won't be Tuesday the way things are going, but somebody's going to win an election, and guess what? God's in control. I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but I don't think it matters. God's in control. Who cares? I'm not saying you shouldn't vote. You should be as involved as you want, but keep it secondary to the gospel and to Jesus. Keep the main thing, and do everything else with that in mind. But it doesn't really matter. It really just doesn't matter. I had a really good friend a long time ago. Somebody got elected who he did not like. And he was in a small group with me. And I remember him telling me, he just brought this up recently. I saw him. I hadn't seen him in forever. So we were chatting at the gym. And he was like, do you remember 12 years ago or however long, I can't remember, years ago. And he was like, I said, I'm going to have to move and everything's going to go to, whatever heck in a handbasket. If this person is elected, the whole place is going to fall apart. And he goes, you looked at me and said, nah, I think we're going to be all right. No matter what. He was like, and here we are 12 years later, and we're all at the gym. Everything's fine. I was like, I know, right? Why is that? I don't know. Maybe we're lucky. Or maybe God's really in control. I don't know. We're about to have a really good opportunity to practice this underreacting, though, aren't we? I'm not that excited about the election, but I'm really excited about the opportunity. I shouldn't say that so easily, but I'm really excited about the opportunity to love some people who are going to be challenging to love. I'm really grateful to have an opportunity, because there are going to be some people who say some things to me that I'm going to want to forgive them, but I'm really not. I'm going to want to punch them in the face or the throat or scissor kick them. I don't know. But what would Jesus do? He would underreact. He wouldn't say you're wrong. He would say, tell me why you think that. Help me understand why you feel that way. Because I don't want to be critical. I just want to be curious. We're going to have a great opportunity. We have them every day, though, right? I hate this is true, but somebody's probably going to get a diagnosis at some point, this week, and our tendency is going to be overreact. But we can underreact if we just choose to trust God first. Maybe there'll be a financial bump in your road. I don't know. I hope not. But odds are, the way life is, something's going to happen, Or you're going to be going to Tampa and have to go through Samaria, and they're not going to like you there. I don't know. Something's going to happen, and you're going to be faced with a moment where you're going to get to decide, am I going to choose to trust God and underreact and believe that he has the whole world in his hands? He's actually in control. Or am I going to overreact because I don't believe God's in control and I got to take control? Those are really the options, you know? Hey, and by the way, this is way bigger than just you. Like, yeah, I mean, I can tell you this for sure from my own experience. I mean, I'm 50 and I am just learning to underreact, and I'm not good at it. Like, I'm like type A, like I can get, you know, the Manto thing. Like, it takes me no time, you know, to get upset about something dumb, you know? So you should see me at four-way stops, right? So, like, it's hard to not be an overreactor. And the reason is that we're sinful. We're broken people. And we like to control things. But here's what I can tell you I have found personally. The more I have decided, like pre-decided, that God is really in control and I don't have to be, the more freedom I have felt. The more peace I've experienced. I think that's probably true for everybody who makes that decision. But it's also not even just about you. I mean, your life will be better when you do this, but it's bigger than that. And I'll tell you, I don't know if you know this or not, but people are also watching us. People are watching you. When you overreact, they see it. When you underreact, they pay attention to. When you overreact as a Jesus follower, you know what non-believers think? They think, well, there they go again. That's what they think. And they're like, you are no different than anybody else. In fact, you're worse because you say that you're different and you're not. Jesus is annoyed with that. When other people watch us underreact, it paints a beautiful picture of who our Heavenly Father really is and that he can be trusted. And that's really the opportunity that we have. My daughter recently, my 16-year-old, the overreactor at times, she, a month ago, had a spinal fusion surgery. There was a second one. It was a revision surgery. And, you know, you don't want to have one of those, much less a revision. So it was tough. It was really hard. And, you know, we're only a month out of it, right? So she's doing great, but it's been hard. And the first couple of weeks are definitely the hardest, right? I mean, at my age, if I had that, I'd be in the hospital still, you know? So she was there for like 4 days. But, you know, that next week at home was a hard recovery. And so we got a lot of FaceTime talking and just, you know, getting up every few hours with medicine and all this stuff. And, you know, we're talking a lot about God, though, and about why does this happen? And, you know, I mean, there's this moment, right, where we would all do the same thing. She's like, why does this have to happen to me? And I'm like, I don't know. I remember one time as we were talking, she said something, and she didn't make this up, right, because that would give her, it's too good. But she didn't make this up, but she said, she goes, it reminds me of something I heard. And she said, if all you have is God, you have all you need. I thought, wow, out of the mouths of babes, right? Like, and I think that's true. Like, I know your circumstances aren't always easy. There are things happening in your life that are hard. It feels chaotic. The world at times feels chaotic. It feels like no one's driving the car. But what if God really is paying attention? And what if he really is in control? And what if all you really need is him? And what if you actually believed that? Can you imagine the freedom it would create in your own heart? Imagine the freedom it would create in your house, in your neighborhood, in your HOA. Woo, we need it there, right? Imagine the freedom that would come politically. Imagine how we would respond. I think that's actually the opportunity for us as followers of Jesus, is to become classic over-under reactors. And in doing so, we actually get to lead and live and love exactly like Jesus did. Can I pray for you guys? Heavenly Father, this is hard to do because it's so hard to embrace and understand, and because we're just broken. I mean, we're broken people, and our natural instinct is to overreact, to take control. But Father, I just pray with everything in us that we will be committed, and not just for the next 2 days, but like we will just make a great commitment to being underreactors. That no matter what happens, our first response is, God, I trust you and I know you've got this. And we'll just keep on going and loving people and loving others, loving you, forgiving people, turning the other cheek, all these things that we're called to do. And the more we underreact, the more we'll be able to. So God, just give us wisdom to know what to do with that. And then God, give us the courage to actually do it. Jesus, we love you so much. We pray all of this in your name. Amen.